Have you ever noticed that in the NBA, the same teams are always contending for playoff spots and championships? The reasons why are very diverse. Some argue it's because of the imbalance between small and large market teams. Some argue it's because of the quality of front offices and the incompetence of certain organizational ownership. And some will argue it's because of, let's call it a competitive advantage, shall we? But it is always the same teams who get in the same positions in the draft to compete for the same goals and seem to end up, for the most part, in similar positions. Every single time. There are the Lakers and the Celtics, two teams that have won a combined 35 championships in their illustrious franchise history and have had 9 conference finals appearances, each since the turn of the millennium. There is the Miami Heat, one of the most successful franchises since the mid-1990s, and a team who has adapted to a variety of unique circumstances and types of teams, from the D-Wade Shaq days to the Big Three era to the years of Jimmy Buckets. You can add the Warriors if you want, but this is a team who still owes a grand portion of their dynastic days to one Wardell Stephen Curry. But then there's the Dallas Mavericks, the Memphis Grizzlies, and the New Orleans Pelicans. While each has had respective stretches of misery, all of the aforementioned franchises' success at any moment in their history can be attributed to a combination of savvy free agency signings, remarkable scouting, a little bit of luck, or all three. But there are other franchises who just always seem to fit their head in the club. Infiltrators, shall we call them, holding on to generational talents that otherwise seemingly always end up in Los Angeles, Boston, or Miami, and crash the party regularly, always to the surprise of the rest of the league. In fact, 2 of these franchises made the finals this year. Since 1994, the Indiana Pacers have made 9 conference finals appearances, as many as the Celtics in that same time frame, despite being hamstrung by stingy ownership, as well as 2 finals appearances. In that same time period, the Oklahoma City Thunder, also a small market team, have made 6 conference finals and 3 finals appearances, and just recently won their first ever championship since moving from Seattle in 2008. Both teams' success can be attributed to different groups of talent across different eras in different parts of the organization. But make no mistake about it, neither team got here just by elite scouting, coaching, or playing on the court. Everything was intentional, but connected. The same thing can apply for the Orlando Magic, the San Antonio Spurs, the Houston Rockets, the Philadelphia 76ers, and many other teams. Differing markets, but the same thing to connect them all to the titans of the NBA landscape. Welcome to the secret society of NBA franchises. To understand the NBA landscape as a whole, we need to flash back first and foremost to one of the most pivotal moments in NBA history. In 1976, 4 new teams joined the NBA via the NBA-ABA merger, those teams being the Denver Nuggets, the New Jersey Nets, the Indiana Pacers, and the San Antonio Spurs. At the time, all 4 teams were relatively new and obscure markets for the league. The quartet entered at a time in which viewership for the NBA was at an all-time low, and although they were good, the 4 small market teams didn't particularly contribute to NBA ratings in any sort of way. The NBA needed a hero, or 2, to change its fortunes quickly, and preferably to a market that would give the NBA the ratings it needed. And by 1979, the NBA had both of their future superstars. Magic Johnson and Larry Bird were destined to be rivals from their college days. As of this recording in 2025, the showdown between Magic's Michigan State Spartans and Bird's Indiana State Sycamores in the 1979 NCAA Championship is still the most viewed national championship game in college basketball history. So upon the draft, the hype was real. Bird had already been selected 6th overall the previous year by the Boston Celtics, a franchise that was looking to carry on the legacy of dominance that had been started by Bob Cousy and Bill Russell in the mid-1950s and carried on by Dave Cowens and John Havlicek throughout the mid-1970s. And Bird was just the guy. After playing out his senior season at Indiana State, Bird joined the Celtics ahead of the 1979-1980 NBA season. Magic Johnson, on the other hand, was entering the 1979 draft as the shoo-in number 1 pick. Thanks to a trade with the New Orleans Jazz, the Lakers had attained the first overall pick, but unlike the Celtics, had fallen to much darker days throughout the mid-70s, in spite of featuring arguably the league's best player in Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. They needed a revival, but Magic was just the guy they needed to turn the tide. And as most of you know, things turned out pretty good for the Lakers. LA won 5 championships with Magic Johnson, and the Celtics themselves were not far behind, having won 3 with Bird in the 80s. The two players' individual rivalry restored the rivalry between the respective teams, a rivalry dating back to the 1960s, but also ushered the golden era of the NBA's popularity. And as the league evolved, faces changed it, and a new standard was set for future NBA eras thanks to the Celtics-Lakers rivalry. In 1984, David Stern became the new commissioner of the NBA, transforming the league's marketability completely. Stern shifted the league's focus in marketing from teams to players, which globalized the brands of the aforementioned Johnson and Bird, as well as bigger stars down the line, including Michael Jordan and LeBron James. And it was during that same time, however, which Stern began to be seen as a controversial figure due to suggested biases towards big markets in order to boost NBA ratings. Such rumors inspired conspiracy theories as to whether the first ever NBA lottery draft in 1985 was rigged by Stern to help the New York Knicks land presumed number 1 pick Patrick Ewing. There are similar conspiracy theories that came up down the line, whether sparked by Stern's own comments about Dream's final matchups or Shaquille O'Neal hinting that Stern tried to sway the Hall of Famer's career at various points in podcasts years after he retired. But regardless of whether Stern rigged the NBA or not, the evidence did back up that bigger markets tended to have larger advantages during his tenure as commissioner, as in 30 years, the Larry O'Brien Trophy was just given out to 8 unique teams, with 2/3 of those champions being given out to one of the Celtics, Lakers, Bulls, or Miami Heat. The former 2 in particular became basketball royalty, head and shoulders above the rest of the NBA as far as historical success. And nothing could take that away from either team. They had owed their success to featuring some of the league's best players in different eras. But by the 2000s, it seemed as if that success seemed to come a little bit too easy for them. Free agency leverage that guaranteed getting the top superstars on the market and remarkably imbalanced trades that only ever seemed to be approved for these two franchises. That's not necessarily saying that it was their fault that the Lakers and the Celtics were benefactors of the stupidity of Billy King or Bill Fitch, or having executive and coaching savants such as Phil Jackson, Danny Ainge, Jerry West, etc. But the reality was that people wanted to come to LA and Boston, and that unless you had drafted a Michael Jordan or LeBron James, chances are you were not going to win consistently over multiple eras. And many teams learned that. In the 1990s, the Orlando Magic watched as a young, potentially dynastic core of Shaquille O'Neal and Penny Hardaway evaporated, not even 12 months after having made their first ever NBA Finals appearance. Due to a combination of the carelessness of the Magic front office in retaining Shaq and Shaq's own personal desire to live the luxurious Hollywood lifestyle, Orlando watched as their young superstar joined forces with Kobe Bryant in LA and win 3 championships with him down the road. A decade and a half later, the same story unfolded yet again when sloppy management of Dwight Howard's contract led the 3-time Defensive Player of the Year to demand a trade, a request that Orlando give into, sending him once again to the Lakers in a deja vu move of what happened in 1996. Other teams went through similar situations. In 2007, Danny Ainge transformed the Celtics in 1 week from a 24-win team to a championship contender, swooping in to acquire Kevin Durant from the Minnesota Timberwolves and Ray Allen from the Seattle Supersonics, two small market teams. The Wolves and the Sonics watched as their former stars got closer to winning a championship with Boston than they ever did with their former teams, eventually winning it all the following season. Title contenders such as the Pacers, Pistons, and Blazers watched as their former stars joined forces to more consistent versions of the Lakers and the Celtics as key members. Even LeBron eventually gave into the joining the dark side, signing with the Lakers in 2018, and 2 years later, helping the Lakers flip the script from a rebuilding bottom feeder to one of the best teams in the league in record time. And throughout all this time, it seemed as if the Lakers and Celtics were just destined to success. No matter what, it didn't matter whether they were supposed to rebuild or just plain bad, but they were Thanos, quickly collecting Infinity Stones, inevitably going to win championships, and much faster than your average contender. And again, it's not necessarily the Lakers or Celtics' fault how careless some of these franchises were with managing their best players, but that's exactly the argument. At some point, teams began to realize that they were not going to be able to compete with just the savviness and the sheer strength and market of Los Angeles or Boston, which mitigated their ability to make mistakes, or even the likes of teams such as New York. They had to think differently. They had to form a pact. And so they did. But when exactly did this pact start? June 25th, 1997. The NBA is in the culmination of a chaotic few years. The 1996 NBA draft just featured a loaded class full of future NBA stars and Hall of Famers alike. But one player who was supposed to have left for the draft stayed back in college. That was presumed generational talent, Tim Duncan of Wake Forest University, who after a strong senior year, once again assured that he would be the clear number one pick ahead of 1997. As to who would end up getting that number one overall pick depended on the lottery, but there were a few constituencies prior to said lottery. For starters, thanks in part to the NBA being a couple years removed from an expansion, neither the Toronto Raptors nor the Vancouver Grizzlies, who had the best odds otherwise, could receive the number one pick. During that same time, there was one team who had gone through vast turmoil. That was the San Antonio Spurs. After a dramatic Cold War between at the time general manager Greg Popovich and rebounding champion Dennis Rodman, the San Antonio Spurs had traded Rodman away ahead of the 1995-96 season to the Chicago Bulls. Ever since, Rodman has become an instrumental piece in the second iteration of Michael Jordan's dynastic team. The Spurs, on the other hand, have failed to replicate their success during Jordan's basketball hiatus from 93 to 1995. Changing head coaches and dealing with injuries along the way. But the silver lining is that they had the third worst record in the league this past year, in a year where Tim Duncan was the first overall pick. And they would win the lottery, over the Boston Celtics, mind you. As soon as the Spurs won the lottery, it was very clear. Tim Duncan was now a San Antonio Spur. And in 2 years, Duncan delivered. Alongside David Robinson, the Spurs' Twin Towers led the franchise to their first ever franchise title in 1999. What happened after is well known. With Duncan, San Antonio won 4 more championships, building themselves through the draft with a pipeline that supposedly assured their success long after they were gone. But during that time, the Spurs did run into hindrances, some that almost destroyed the franchise before they even had a chance at a dynasty. Let's talk about the Orlando Magic. This is a franchise who, over the years, has built a reputation of both carelessness and tragically unlucky circumstances. Yes, Shaq left the Magic after just 4 years. Yes, Dwight Howard got traded just a few years after Orlando had made a championship run in 2009. But in between both those eras, Orlando had almost built another contender. After a few years in NBA purgatory, the Magic ushered in a new era with young head coach Doc Rivers, departing ways with every veteran from the 1995 finals attending squad to make cap space for the 2000 free agency class. That summer, the Magic made strong pushes to acquire 3 future Hall of Famers, those being the emerging do-it-all forward Tracy McGrady, Detroit star Grant Hill, and one Tim Duncan. The Magic were successful in acquiring McGrady and Hill, but Duncan was more challenging. Ultimately, Tim Duncan re-signed with the Spurs, but depending on who you ask, one thing was certain. The Magic came very close to signing the future 5-time NBA champ and Hall of Famer, but they did not. And instead, Orlando was left with one of the biggest what-ifs in NBA history. In the following years, the Hill-McGrady experiment failed to materialize. Hill struggled with injuries that completely derailed his career, and without his co-star, even as McGrady became one of the league's best players, Orlando could only go so far. Then, in the 2003-2004 season, the wheels fell completely apart, with McGrady struggling with injuries and the rest of the team regressing dramatically. But this move once again rejuvenated the franchise unknowingly, because as the Magic collapsed to the worst record in the league, they subsequently won the lottery for the number 1 overall pick in the 2004 draft. And with that pick, they drafted Dwight Howard. And the same thing happened twice over. In 2013, the year after trading Howard to the Lakers, the Magic once again finished with the league's worst record. This time, they received the 2nd overall pick, a blessing in disguise as they avoided drafting Anthony Bennett and instead selected Victor Oladipo. And while Oladipo never developed into the superstar the Magic had hoped to pick, his career and Orlando's journey to drafting him became a cataclysm to the rest of the NBA's secret network. More on that later, but in the meantime, let's get back to the San Antonio Spurs. The mid-2000s was a great time for Spurs fans. 3 championships in 5 seasons and a dynasty that would continue to reap success now that their franchise centerpiece had been locked up for the foreseeable future. Not to mention, ever since David Robinson retired in 2003, the Spurs had landed upon 2 more franchise cornerstones, those being Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili, thanks in part to arguably the league's best front office, second to none at identifying international talent. As a result, the Spurs essentially became the pipeline and standard of excellence to the rest of the NBA as far as roster construction. As a result, the Spurs' philosophies quickly began to catch on to the rest of the league, attracting teams to hire away assistant coaches and executives alike. And one executive in particular became a hot commodity in 2007. His name, Sam Presti. Now, we've talked about Sam Presti before, but Presti's own career trajectory and separation from the Spurs marked 2 significant turning points in the league as a whole. After 2007, the Spurs fell into a championship dry spell, which was marked by retooling on the fly without their former assistant GM Wonderkid. In the meantime, Presti built a juggernaut throughout that decade, which would hit a major turning point that indirectly led to the NBA Finals matchup we just saw in 2025, affecting not just the Thunder, but their opponent in the finals as well, the Indiana Pacers, who are the 3rd member of this iron triangle that has dominated basketball for the last 2 decades. So let's talk about the Pacers. The Pacers are, in spite of their limitations as far as thrifty owners and small markets, still one of the best franchises in basketball. For a team that rarely spends into the luxury tax, the Pacers have been a gold standard as far as successfully hiring head coaches, drafting superstars, and finding quality rotation players. As we mentioned earlier, the Pacers have had 9 conference finals appearances in the last 31 years, as well as 2 finals appearances. Of the 7 conference finals they lost, the Pacers went to Game 7 in 4 of them. But much like the Magic, the Pacers have had their fair share of curses. Take 2004, for instance. Indiana had one of the league's best defenses, led by a dynamic duo of Ron Artest and Jermaine O'Neal. Even at the twilight of the legendary Reggie Miller's career, the Pacers were at the doorstep of true NBA greatness. A championship was so close that they could almost taste it, but instead, a defeat at the hands of the hated rival Detroit Pistons, who then upset the Lakers in the finals. Gut-wrenching, but the Pacers ran it back. With Artest and O'Neal improving even further the following year, the Pacers entered the 2004-05 season with the 2nd best odds in the Eastern Conference and tore throughout the beginning stretch of the year. In a rematch against the Pistons, Indiana showed that this year they were better, stronger, and unlikely to lose in 7 again. But then the last 2 minutes of the game happened. And then the nightmare just started.
Have to walk past the Pacer bench to go. Now Artest has jumped over the scorer's table and is trying to get down to the bench. Artest is in the stands. Oh, this is awful. Fans are getting involved. Steven Jackson's in the fans. Rasheed Wallace going into the stands. The security trying to somehow restore order. Fans and players are going at it, and the players trying to help each other out. This is a disgrace. All the players now, they're jumping in there to try and get the other players out because the fans have come involved. Oh, what a sad scene here at the Palace. And now another fight's breaking out in front of the Pistons bench. It's a fan on the court. This is very, very dangerous. Fans are throwing cups with liquid in them now onto the court. Ron Artest has a look in his eye that's very scary right now. You wonder if the official's going to let this game continue. Now they're throwing bottles out onto the floor. They're trying to get the Pacers to go back to the locker room. What was maybe you could call a hard foul at best has turned into just an ugly, ugly scene.
The malice at the Palace. One of the ugliest, most infamous moments in NBA history. And a moment that destroyed the Pacers. Multiple players suspended, primarily Artest and O'Neal, who were at the forefront of the headlines. Artest in particular was suspended for the rest of the year, and without their best player, Indiana lost in the second round to the Pistons. After that, this iteration of the Pacers was never the same. And unfortunately, the process of Indiana being oh so close and then having a team and a superstar who falls apart seemed to just keep repeating. In 2010, the Pacers drafted Paul George, whose first 9 seasons became the crossroads for all 3 franchises when flash forwarding to present day. George quickly rose to NBA excellence. In his 3rd season, George won Most Improved Player, and a year later solidified himself as an All-NBA first-teamer, leading the Pacers to the doorstep of an NBA Finals appearance, losing in 7 games to the LeBron James-led Miami Heat. In 2013, the Pacers ran it back, this time finishing the year as the number 1 seed, led by George, as well as a supporting cast of George Hill, Roy Hibbert, Lance Stevenson, and David West. And yet again, the Pacers lost to the Heat. And after that, things got worse. In a routine Olympic pickup game, George suffered an open fracture of his fibula and tibia bones, ending his season completely, even before it began, and altering the Pacers' trajectory as a result. George missed the entire 2015 season, and even after returning, was never the same player while wearing gold and blue. Following the 2017 season, George was traded to the Oklahoma City Thunder, and 2 years later was traded to the Los Angeles Clippers. And as most of you know, the trade ended up becoming a good portion of the Thunder core that won the 2025 NBA championship. But at the same time, this trade would not have happened had it been for another draft decision the Pacers had made during the early 2010s. The Pacers entered the 2011 NBA draft with the 15th overall pick, and in a loaded class had a plethora of options to choose from, despite not having a lottery pick. Instead, Larry Bird, now the general manager of the Pacers, decided to find a more solidified option in the form of a trade acquisition. As a result, Bird traded the draft rights to the 15th overall pick to the San Antonio Spurs for George Hill, a move that backfired miserably, as that 15th overall pick ended up being Kawhi Leonard, who quickly became the presumed succession plan after Tim Duncan. In just year 2, Leonard became a starter on a finals-appearing Spurs team who had successfully retooled into once again a true championship contender. And although they lost, the Spurs took the Miami Heat to 7 games, losing quite literally because of one Ray Allen 3 and a legendary Game 7 performance by LeBron James. The following year, Leonard improved further, becoming the 3rd youngest Finals MVP of all time, thanks in part to his efforts in effectively defending LeBron James in a rematch of the 2013 Finals. And Leonard got even better, As Tim Duncan's career began to dwindle down, Leonard became arguably the league's best two-way player. In 2016, the Spurs became the best second seed in NBA history, winning 67 games and only being the second seed because of a Warriors team that won a record 73 games that year. But it was this season that also became one of the largest domino effects in sports ever. Remember Sam Presti? Well, by this point, the Thunder had built themselves into a perennial juggernaut thanks in part to Presti's remarkable scouting abilities, which had landed the Thunder not one, but two future MVPs in Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook. And for the third time in 5 seasons, the Thunder met the Spurs in the playoffs, this time in the conference finals. After going down 2-0, OKC stormed back, winning the next 4 to set up a date with the Warriors in the conference finals. The rest is history. The Thunder blew a 3-1 series lead to the Warriors, who, after blowing a 3-1 series lead themselves in the finals, would sign Kevin Durant the following offseason, creating a monopoly on the rest of the league. This monopoly also indirectly skewed the futures of both the Spurs and the Thunder, as well as the Pacers, who we'll get to later on. For the Thunder, the result was very immediate. OKC lost one of the best players in basketball and began to compensate to re-grasp their previous success. And said compensation led the Thunder to trade for Paul George in 2017, who they would eventually flip to the Clippers for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and 6 first-round picks in 2019, one of whom would become Jalen Williams. But for the Spurs, the Durant move was more of a slow and painful alteration of their future. In order to avoid Durant, Golden State made several other moves during the 2016 offseason, adding multiple veterans for the vet minimum contract to fill out their roster, including Zaza Pachulia, who became Golden State's starting center the following 2 seasons. That seemed like a minor move at the time, but 9 months later, the pieces of the puzzle began to align. After yet another strong season by both San Antonio and Golden State, the two teams met for a highly anticipated conference finals matchup. But Game 1 proved to be a turning point for the Spurs franchise. After being up 25 points against the Warriors, with Kawhi Leonard playing the game of his life, Leonard landed awkwardly on the foot of Zaza Pachulia, twisting his ankle and subsequently ruling him out for the rest of the game. That ankle injury turned out to be a series-ending injury, as the Warriors swept the Spurs without their superstar. After that, things got much worse. Leonard continued dealing with rehab and afterwards struggled even further to get back on the court after suffering a quad injury that kept him out majority of the 2017-18 season and alienated him from the franchise. In the offseason, Kawhi Leonard requested a trade to the Raptors. The Spurs watched as their supposed crown prince after Tim Duncan won a championship in Toronto and then signed for the Clippers in free agency, without ever getting a chance at extending the superstar they had homegrown. And Leonard's free agency decision proved to be instrumental in changing the fate of the Thunder as well, as Leonard instilled a caveat of trading for Paul George to whatever team he signed with, something that the Clippers ended up doing the same day they signed Kawhi Leonard. So, in just 8 years, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard had become the building bridge to the future of the NBA. Draft picks being shifted by the half dozen, championship contenders being torn apart and sent into full-on rebuilds, and flash forward 4 years later, some of those rebuilds have turned out really well. But everything just seems too connected. The Spurs and Thunder's playoff matchups, the Spurs executive tree, and the draft picks and trades intertwined by mere fate. This is where the Indiana Pacers and the Orlando Magic come back into the fold. Remember Victor Oladipo? Well, Oladipo's aforementioned stagnation became a blessing in disguise for Orlando. As the Magic stagnated as an NBA bottom feeder, they traded their former second overall pick to the OKC Thunder for Serge Ibaka, just about a week and a half before free agency, as well as the draft rights to the 11th overall pick in 2016, who became Domantas Sabonis, in hopes of keeping Kevin Durant. And although Durant signed with the Warriors in free agency, Oladipo still proved enough value to the Thunder for them to trade him a year later to the Indiana Pacers, as well as Sabonis. And in Indiana, both Oladipo and Sabonis became stars. The 2017-2018 Indiana Pacers became a pleasant surprise. They finished the regular season with 48 wins and the 5th seed in the Eastern Conference, setting up a date with LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers, a team that they took to the doorstep of Game 7. And although they lost, the future seemed bright as could be. Sabonis was still incredibly young, and Oladipo, fresh off of winning the Most Improved Player award, was just entering his prime. Going into the 2019 season, the Pacers began right where they left off, once again winning 48 games and earning the 5th seed in the Eastern Conference. But this time, things were different. On January 23, 2019, Victor Oladipo suffered a ruptured quad tendon against the Toronto Raptors, a season-ending injury, and one that, much like in the cases of Artest and George, derailed the Pacers' future championship aspirations. As a result, the small-market Pacers team refused the risk of re-signing Oladipo and Sabonis. After a disastrous start to the 2021 season, Oladipo was traded to the Houston Rockets, and a year later, Sabonis was exchanged to the Sacramento Kings for Tyrese Haliburton. The Tyrese Haliburton trade became a monumental move for Indiana, converting a middling and mediocre future with one led by one of the most promising young stars in the game. In just 4 years, the Pacers had made lemons into lemonade, trading a former MVP for 2 All-Stars and trading those 2 All-Stars for a future league leader in assists and one of the best young point guards in the NBA. Additionally, Haliburton became the leader for a Pacers team that won 50 games in 2025 and eventually made a surprise run to the NBA Finals. The Orlando Magic, on the other hand, used smaller moves to eventually build a more formidable contender. After trading away Oladipo, the Magic eventually dealt Serge Ibaka to the Toronto Raptors for Terrence Ross. Ross proved to be extremely important for the Magic, as he was the product of a wheeling and dealing method that ensured Orlando were not leveraged into overpaying a player such as Oladipo or Ibaka, who had not produced for them up to expectations, or trading them for less value than necessary. As a result, the Magic had extra cap space to re-sign multiple veterans from years past, such as Nikola Vucevic and Aaron Gordon, who by now had emerged into some of the league's most underrated players, while also continuing to rebuild through their many lottery picks. Well, somewhat. After a couple years as a middle-of-the-pack contender, the Magic fell apart in 2021, and with both Vucevic and Gordon wanted out, the time to rebuild was now. Prior to the trade deadline, Nikola Vucevic was traded to the Chicago Bulls and Aaron Gordon to the Denver Nuggets. And thanks to the Vucevic trade, Orlando received a second lottery pick in the upcoming 2021 NBA draft, which they used to select Franz Wagner. A year later, Orlando's teardown gave them the second worst record in the Eastern Conference and landed them great odds to receive the first pick via the lottery, which they did. Flash forward to the 2022 NBA draft, and the Magic selected Paolo Banchero, 2022 NBA Rookie of the Year, an All-Star, and already one of the best scorers and two-way players in the league. In just 2 years, the Magic had received the 4th first overall pick in franchise history, in just a span of 30 years no less, which they had used to land a 4th straight potential franchise-changing superstar, and once again, build a young and promising core that, if not able to once again become a championship contender, has enough talent to alter the league in an unknown way. And granted, these minor moves itself didn't necessarily stand out in the case of the Magic, but Orlando did contribute to the league in many other ways. For starters, Nikola Vucevic. Nikola Vucevic was a player that largely changed the trajectory on what was otherwise a middling and lost Magic franchise throughout the 2010s. And had it not been for the failures of the Shaq Hardaway or Hill McGrady duos, Vucevic would have never been in Orlando in the first place. Nikola Vucevic was drafted 16th overall in the 2011 NBA draft, one pick after Kawhi Leonard by the Philadelphia 76ers. A year later, Vucevic found himself on Orlando as part of that very infamous Dwight Howard trade, a 4-team trade that unknowingly granted Orlando their future center for the next decade. For the next 5 years, Vucevic slowly developed on the mediocre Magic into a powerhouse at center, using his lack of size as an advantage and mastering post moves and defense in a way that contributed to team basketball. By 2019, Vucevic had become one of the most underrated stars in the league and the best player on a playoff-bound Magic team. and when Vucevic's now inflated value landed him a trade to the Chicago Bulls in 2021, it marked a turning point for yet another aforementioned team to fully commit to a rebuild. The following offseason, the San Antonio Spurs organized a sign-and-trade with the Chicago Bulls, now with Vucevic attempting to go all in to acquire DeMar DeRozan, who the Spurs had obtained back in 2018 from the Kawhi Leonard trade, and who had helped keep the Spurs in some form of playoff relevancy even after losing Leonard. The DeRozan trade saw the Spurs get a 2025 first-round pick and 2 second-round picks, and ushered in a San Antonio exodus over the following year, with the Spurs giving away their 2 guards, Derek White to the Celtics and DeJounte Murray to the Hawks, the latter trade giving San Antonio an extra 2 first-round picks unprotected. And as the Spurs tanked, just like in 1997, the Spurs landed yet another generational talent 26 years later, winning the Victor Wembanyama sweepstakes. As Wembanyama quickly became everything the Spurs had hoped and more, the pieces around became more clear, and a year later, deja vu of what had occurred just 3 years prior appeared. During the 2024 offseason, the Spurs networked once again with a very familiar team, the Chicago Bulls, and once again, the move was a sign-and-trade involving DeMar DeRozan, a sign-and-trade that sent the former Spur to Sacramento to form a pair alongside former Pacer Domantas Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox, and gave the Spurs Harrison Barnes, again also including the Chicago Bulls. But Barnes was not the last king to become a part of the Spurs roster. At this 2025 trade deadline, the same 3 teams, the Bulls, the Kings, and the Spurs, made yet another transaction, with the Spurs this time acquiring De'Aaron Fox and using the compensation received from giving away DeRozan 3 years prior in order to get Fox, trading those picks away to the Chicago Bulls. And again, none of this would have happened without the Orlando Magic, had it not been for them trading away Nikola Vucevic in 2021 or Dwight Howard in 2012. And that would have not happened had the Spurs not screwed over Orlando's chances of signing Tim Duncan in 2000. More than 25 years after originally drafting Duncan, the Spurs got their perfect return on investment to build a second contender alongside a second generational talent by using the same team as a sacrificial pawn for over 2 decades. The ultimate domino effect that simultaneously shaped the fates of 2 other franchises throughout the last 15 years. Make that 3. No, sorry, 4. If we review the teams that connect this entangled web of NBA networking, we've now mentioned the San Antonio Spurs, the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Indiana Pacers, the Orlando Magic, and sparsely as well, the Chicago Bulls, the Toronto Raptors, and the Sacramento Kings. But there are 2 other franchises that put all the pieces together. The first one, and the more simple one to discuss, is the Philadelphia 76ers. The 76ers are a team that can widely be regarded as one of the most turbulent franchises over the past decade. They are infamous for their trust the process tankathon galore rebuild effort in the mid-2010s, led by publicly disgraced ex-GM Sam Hinkie, whose hoarding of draft picks essentially became a precursor to the gargantuan moves made by Presti at the turn of the decade. Hinkie was a protege of Daryl Morey, who we'll get to in a second. He was hired by the Sixers in 2013, and upon being hired, began a mass exodus of veteran talent to accumulate as much young talent as possible, while simultaneously kicking the can down the road in an attempt to build a super team. Amongst those picks, Hinkie had some horrific misses, including the likes of Jahlil Okafor and Nerlens Noel. But he also drafted the likes of future All-NBA players, Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. By the time Hinkie was run out of town in 2017, Philadelphia had put together a pretty solid roster, and the following season, they began to win. After a 3rd seed finish in 2018, the 76ers got better in 2019, and went all in, trading for Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris in an attempt to win a title. But then, Kawhi Leonard did this.
It's off to Leonard, defended by Simmons. Is this the dagger?
And suddenly, the Sixers were back to the drawing board, in a bad way. The following offseason, Philly overpaid Tobias Harris while letting the superior Butler walk in free agency, and as a result, the Sixers fell to the 6th seed in 2020, watching as Butler led an underdog Miami Heat team all the way to the NBA Finals. Things needed to change quick, so the Sixers looked outside the organization for help. The following offseason, Philadelphia hired former Rockets GM Daryl Morey as their new president of basketball ops. Morey might as well be the most important piece to this NBA network when we talk about 2010s basketball, as he made arguably two of the most influential trades of the decade, which nonetheless the same team. That team being the Oklahoma City Thunder. Let's flash back to 2012. The Thunder make the NBA Finals for the first time since moving to Oklahoma and are led by the aforementioned MVPs Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant, as well as another future MVP, James Harden. Following the offseason, Harden is up for a contract extension, and with Thunder Governor Clay Bennett unwilling to go into the luxury tax, the Rockets trade for the reigning sixth man of the year, giving up merely one first-round pick for the future Hall of Famer. Flash forward 7 seasons, and Harden is now a 3-time NBA scoring champ, multiple-time MVP finalist, as well as the 2018 NBA MVP. Whereas the Thunder have been in a revolving door to not only fill up the void that Harden left back in 2012 by acquiring players such as Victor Oladipo, but also the hole left by Kevin Durant, who one may as well argue might have stayed had Harden not been traded. But bygones are bygones, and hindsight is 2020. Regardless, Morey's trade of Harden set off a chain reaction still reverberating in the NBA today, and simultaneously might have set up the futures of 2 other organizations. So now in 2019, the Rockets have just traded for Russell Westbrook, giving the Thunder an extra 4 first-round picks and Houston a second superstar in an all-out experiment to win a championship. But unfortunately, that experiment failed. The Rockets lost the second round of the playoffs in 2020 to the Los Angeles Lakers, but things were about to get more complicated. So, as we now know, Morey left his job in 2020 as Rockets GM for a higher position with Philadelphia, and this move sent the Rockets into a dramatic next few months. Just a year after mortgaging their future for him, the Rockets dealt Russell Westbrook to the Washington Wizards, and with new management at the helm, James Harden quickly expressed his desires to be traded too. On January 14, 2021, the Rockets traded the former face of their franchise to the Brooklyn Nets in a trade that sent Victor Oladipo to the Rockets for 7 first-round picks in return, reuniting Harden with his former OKC teammate Kevin Durant, as well as Kyrie Irving. But that super team did not last long, with Harden requesting a trade a year later from Brooklyn as well. And who granted his wish of a new destination? None other than Daryl Morey. On February 10, 2022, James Harden was traded to the Philadelphia 76ers in a move that marked the end of the Brooklyn Nets championship window. In the following year, both Irving and Durant were traded for massive hauls, setting up the Nets with a gauntlet of future draft picks that resembled those of the Thunder and the Sixers before them, and foreshadowing a 2025 draft class in which the Nets made 5 first-round selections. As for the Rockets, they used their picks pretty well, drafting defensive stud Tari Eason with the Nets' 2022 first-round pick and promising guard Reed Sheppard with their 24 first-round pick. Essentially, Daryl Morey's obsession for James Harden inadvertently kickstarted the rebuilds of not one, but 2 teams, and subsequently built a championship winner in 2025, as well as a championship runner-up by means of helping the Pacers get compensation for trading Paul George to the Thunder, before the Thunder themselves traded George for quite literally their 2 best players. Now, all of these things should be taken with some grain of salt, because at the end of the day, every person can find a few connections in the NBA and refer it as a league-wide conspiracy or collusion, or as I like to refer it, networking. But it should still be noted that many of these teams continuously end up affecting other teams over and over again. It's a pattern. The Spurs, Kings, and Bulls made multiple trades that all ended up benefiting the Spurs long term. The Rockets and the Thunder made multiple trade moves that set up multiple decades of success in different ways. The same players became the same chess pieces across different decades, tying the fates of different teams by their decisions. And that's just the domino effect that is in any sport, not just the NBA. But what does stand out is the commonalities in result. The Spurs continue to remain one of the most successful organizations in basketball, 2 decades after drafting Tim Duncan because of Kawhi Leonard. And even after losing Kawhi Leonard in a very unlucky fashion, they once again built a possible championship contender in a mirror image view of 1997. Along the way, they debilitated the future of an already unlucky Orlando Magic organization, while simultaneously kickstarting another era of glory. The Spurs were also the gift of God for the Thunder, as the assistant GM who put together Tim Duncan's sidekicks became the messiah who built a championship team 18 seasons after being hired. Their desire to acquire Kawhi Leonard at the detriment of the Pacers became the revival the Pacers needed, and the gift that kept on giving, even as cursed as Indiana continues to be. But throughout all of that, every other team has had the same results. The Thunder continue to find MVP after MVP and build 55-win teams. The Pacers continue to be a winning organization in spite of never spending luxury money. The Orlando Magic continue to be an organization who repeatedly find themselves picking number 1 after bungling promising rosters. The Kings and the Bulls continue to be amongst the league's worst, and the Rockets found themselves back at the top of the Western Conference standings this past year after a few years rebuilding, just like they were with Harden. And what this just goes to show is the importance of organizational stability, the quality necessary in front offices to not only make exceptional basketball moves in free agency, trades, and the draft, but also have a proper vision that ensures the consistency of a franchise long after its superstars disappear over the horizon. And most notably, the lack of margin of error to miss in the NBA, as a player, a coach, a GM, or owner, especially teams such as these. This is why teams such as the Spurs are notoriously famous for their coaching and executive trees, and majority of the successful franchises in the NBA have some sort of person that has remained in the organization over the decades, and if not, at the very least, some sort of succession plan. For the Miami Heat, it's Pat Riley. For the Spurs, that person is Greg Popovich. For the Pacers, it's Larry Bird, who has served multiple different positions for Indiana as both a coach and in the front office, much like Popovich. For the Thunder, it's Sam Presti. For the Rockets and the Sixers, that man was Daryl Morey, who affected both teams directly by means of running basketball ops, but also indirectly by means of mentoring the men who built their respective franchises' current core pieces. And the same thing can be said for teams such as the Sacramento Kings, the Chicago Bulls, or even teams that we didn't mention, such as the New York Knicks, when discussing the years and years of incompetency that their teams exuded. The one team that can't really be put in such categories is the Orlando Magic, who still remain consistent in their performance by means of repeating the same mistakes. And again, whether resulting in success or misery, it's these patterns that lead to a team's trajectory over the years. Because at the end of the day, none of these teams are the Lakers or the Celtics, franchises that can continuously have the leverage to attract the best superstars in the game in free agency or build a championship-winning team from scratch in one offseason by just making blockbuster trades like its NBA 2K. In the modern NBA, basketball resembles modern society. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and unless you get really fucking lucky and find a generational talent like Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Steph Curry, or hell, even Tim Duncan, chances are conditions will stay that way. But for the teams who aren't the Lakers or the Celtics, there are different types of royalty. The NBA is now a feudal system, working in harmony to create their own destiny. They say that the NBA is a superstar league, that it's defined by the most prominent names of every generation. And to a degree that is true. But I'd argue that it's all a network. The same teams, the same results, and yet creating new narratives.